So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where you find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per MashiyAhu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiyach laid waste from many centuries. As we read it in MashiyAhu the prophet, it's very important understanding this particular time of the restoration, where then the nations are absolutely in a position of making no decisions as far as trade, and the kingdom of the east, as these nations of the east are then preparing themselves for the time of the trade of the end. MashiyAhu the prophet gives a few clues regarding this period. So then, very importantly, as the system of the West, including the Americas, this system is unfortunately obsolete regarding then the trade of these nations and the amount of trade these nations are involved with. And then the kingdom of the east, as per the instructions of the prophets, are obviously becoming a whole lot more powerful because of the many networks involved with the system. Now, the problem is the situation with the economy does not take a few days to ruin it, and it doesn't take a few days to fix it. Now then, since the system requires a long time for the proper adjustment, what has then the prophet, the great prophet, the Mashiyach, MashiyAhu, Yirmiyahu, Zechariah, and then Revelation or Galah, what have these prophets? So then we should spend time and study these holy instructions. Now then, Revelation gives a few clues, and linked up with the Revelation comes Daniel, and Daniel the prophet spoke of a system that was weakened, and the scripture uses the word despised because it's a form of trade that no longer works, but not because of a lack of capability. It's simply a lack of trade itself from a system that has overly spent itself. Now then, there are many kinds of stealing or many kinds of deviation of funding, and truly the situation regarding China and their partners in the new BRICS system, it's not only hard work, is maintaining close tabs on people who are then deviating the money and deviating funds, and also making sure that the tax basis people don't steal. Now then, Revelation is very blunt regarding then the freighters of the earth or the merchants of the earth, and the importance of taxation, because the combination of hard work, maintaining taxes properly paid for, and maintaining close tab on politicians making dirty deals, then obviously improves the economy. Now then, the kingdom of the East was set aside for a very specific purpose. Mashiyach, the 23rd chapter, explains then the improvement or the restoration of the trade during the time of the end. Now, Mashiyach, he was very hated during his time when he was involved, so much so that he was sawn in half. So the people of the time truly had it with the prophet, because he was giving warnings, giving prophecies, and people would not listen to him. Now then, the spirit related with the scripture back then, and those who are speaking on behalf of the scripture, they have the same spirit. So the hatred that I had in Mashiyach, though a lot of people who are hypocrites, sometimes they steal, they lie, they cheat, and then they go to church and throw up their hands in the air, and absolutely scoundrels beyond measure. And they read Mashiyach thinking that it was an absolutely great prophet, and everybody listened to him because he was the prophet of the divine. And they don't have a clue what they're talking about. So then, a portion of the 23rd chapter of Mashiyach speaks of the burden of then the ships, Tyre, Tarshish, and then explains situations of the ships of Kittim. And interestingly, Daniel later on makes the same point regarding this particular understanding. Now, as was said before, on the 9th verse of the 23rd chapter, it explains, and whose merchants then are the chief traders, are then these honored of the earth, and explains then of their shame. Now then, there are portions of the trade of the time of restoration, and there is the trade of the time of the deceitful period, where then the tabernacle of the Mashiyach would no longer exist. So then the prophet Daniel, roughly a couple hundred years later, pointed out precisely what then the period of the restoration is, so as in Galah. So once again, when people don't take the time to study the scripture, they don't take a notepad, writing the information, writing the original language, there they are, trying to find fault in someone else's life, while they themselves, when they observe their lives in the light of the instructions or the scripture, there they are, going back and forth. And the Mashiyach said very precisely that we should search the scripture and make sure the prophecies are then told. It came a point during the time when then the Mashiyach ben Yosef was speaking with his very own, and they were questioning him, because there was a period of time where then the spring feast was completed by the Mashiyach himself. And there they were, boastful. It's quite very amazing, and not only amazing, but then when people they begin to hear those who have the knowledge and understanding of the instructions, they have a tendency of having for themselves. However, they don't walk with the divine. So then the Mashiyach ben Yosef, in his absolutely vast wisdom, began to teach them a few portions of the Torah. And as they wanted their own way of doing things, as the Mashiyach had a heated debate with those Eugene, he was explaining then sections of this particular prophecy. And the Mashiyach ben Yosef wasn't explaining. And the Mashiyach went out of the temple. Now there were many situations regarding the temple, because it came a point where the Mashiyach was not let near the temple. But his very own came near and were showing him the construction of the temple. But he said, "Behold, don't you observe these? Truly." The Mashiyach said, absolutely no stone is going to be left upon another, but each of them must be thrown down. Then the Mashiyach ben Yosef sat on the Mount of Olives with his very own. Then they drew near and were saying among themselves and said, "So then, let us know then what the signs of the coming of the end of the world." Now they were questioning regarding the autumn feast found in Vaikra. So it is amazing the number of people, yet they don't have any idea the importance of the holy feasts. Now then, as far as the nation, they have realized that our economy is ruined, and it won't take 40 years to get it fixed. And the flexible network of the East is becoming a real problem, because various kinds of monetary systems, centralized and decentralized, can be used by the Chinese government or their partners, while then the West is wallowing around in very antiquated systems. Now the point is, it doesn't mean that the system is not worthy. It simply means that the electronic age of trade of this period is much more advanced than the system used 50 or 60, 70 years ago. New technologies are used, and the nations are making preferences as far as what kind of a system they want used. Thus then the flexibility of a network. Now then, continuing, the Mashiyach ben Yosef was there speaking of the temple. And then the Mashiyach said, "Behold, don't you observe these?" The point is, because the Mashiyach was anointed with the presence, he had the presence of the divine in his life. And they wanted to utilize the knowledge that the Mashiyach gave for their own benefit, for their own evil and destructive and dirty ideas. Now the Hamashiach simply said, as they were asking, but how is it going to take place then the autumn feast? And the Hamashiach said, be aware, let no person deceive you. So the Hamashiach was already saying, hey, you boys are scoundrelizing yourselves, you are listening to junk, you are listening to the words of the divine, and you want to store up to use it on their own benefit. And the Hamashiach simply said, be aware, let no person deceives you. He already knew that their ideas was coming from their very own. Thus, when the nation turns to itself and forgets the scripture, the economy always ruins. But continuing. And then the Hamashiach continues on, for many shalt come in his name, and wilt say then, so and so is the Mashiyach, the other is the Mashiyach, and many wilt deceive. So the main point of the Hamashiach is saying, you boys are deceived. You think you can store up the presence of the divine for your own schemes? And the Hamashiach did not longer spoke with them. And simply he said, so then if you want to know the future, for you are bound to hear of war and rumors of wars, but watch out. So the Hamashiach was not giving much leverage, because they were absolutely deceived. Their ideas of the end of times and kingdom and so on and so forth, they were absolutely deceived. They simply want to gather the presence of the divine they want to use for their own benefit. So then the Hamashiach then continues, for it is required that these situations must take place, but the time of the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and plagues and earthquakes in many places, but these things are only the starting points. Now the Hamashiach is talking of a period of time. As they were consumed by having an idea to store up the presence of the divine to use for their own benefits, the Hamashiach is speaking of a period of time. So when people are not aware of the holy feasts, they don't understand the timing of the feast, the time of the year, they don't understand the calendar, then deceived. That's what the Hamashiach ben Yosef is saying. The promised prophet of Moshe. He is saying. So the Hamashiach is pointing towards a fact requiring timing to understand the time of the end. Some people read, and they are as blind as ever. They read through with the desire of finding something for their own benefit. And the Hamashiach says, you are being deceived. And he continues, then they will deliver yourselves for troubles and so on and so forth, and many you shall be hated in the nations because of his name. Then many will stumble and hate one another and betray one another. And many false prophets arise and deceive many. Now then the Hamashiach ben Yosef is explaining regarding prophecy. Now, it doesn't take much for a person understanding when the Mashiyach said the first time deceive. There were a few people over there during his time. They were talking of prophecies, and trying to make the kingdom of the nation once again shine as it was previously. And the Mashiyach said, don't be deceived, because there is a time and a place for it. So then, the Mashiyach continues, and he's explaining regarding then these false prophets. Now, the Mashiyach ben Yosef is explaining a period of time related with the real prophecies. Not those Eugene junkies that are trying to make the kingdom before the period of time that the Eternal has chosen. That's why the Mashiyach was very categoric in what he said. And he didn't elaborate in trying to explain it. He said, simply, you are deceived. Now, the Mashiyach then continues, stating then the prophecies of Daniel. That's extremely important, because the Mashiyach ben Yosef ties up the second understanding of true prophecies, true timing, and directly related with Daniel the prophet. Then he continues, those who then understand the prophecies would have obviously enlightenment. Then those who are in Yehuda, let them go to the mountains. And he continues, and he gives a few clues of the period of time when the alignment of these understandings would take place. Then, when people, they don't take the time, they don't study what the Mashiyach said from the enlightenment of the culture he was involved in. Many people have the understanding that they had some sort of a spirit in his life. That he was very young, he began to teach the instructions because there was a divine spirit in him. When he had to study it, and very hard in fact. Joseph and Miriam, they were very studied of the scripture, because there is a very important principle on the Torah. And the divine has said parents should teach their children diligently regarding every word of these holy instructions. Now, for some reason, when it comes to the prophet Moshe, he also had to study. He studied under his own father-in-law, Jethro. Now, when it comes to the Mashiyach ben Yosef, he had a spirit that taught him every portion of the scripture. So where would be then this mitzvah regarding then the parents teaching diligently their children? There is mysticism. Some sort of a spirit entered the boy and began to teach the entire scripture. And then some people ask, how come this spirit that was so given during that time was never given to us, so then we can study the scripture and understand as he did? Because the spirit never entered him the way they are thinking of. The Mashiyach had a study. His parents were very diligent as far as teaching the scripture. Now, the situation then continues, because then, and pray that your flight won't be in the winter or in the Shabbat, for then shalt have great tribulation. Since then the world has started until the present time, nor will it ever be again. And if those days were not shortened, that's another problem, because people were thinking as far as the reduction of time. And the Hamashiach ben Yosef was right in one point. Now there is a reduction of time when there is a fast pace of prophecies taking place very fast. Now then, reading from the instructions, reading from the timing it takes place, the Shabbat, what takes place with the Pesach, Bikurim, then Shavuot, and the holy feasts during the calendar year of the divine. There are a few understandings as far as the time of the autumn feast. Now then, once again, people are trying to interpret the scripture on their own. Because the Hamashiach can come at any time. And they don't understand each layer of a specific feast or moed. Now then, why then the Hamashiach spoke of the time being shortened? Was he saying or implying that then the time of the prophecy was going to be reduced? Or was he saying in a way that doesn't jeopardize the prophecies themselves, only stating that these prophecies would take place very quickly? Now the world has a spirit that's absolutely scoundrelized beyond imagination. Most principally during these last 1,000 years was absolutely scoundrel beyond measure. And when people go along with situations in idle motion, they get very strange information from the world. But those people who are studying, as the angel said, those who are wise shall understand. Now wisdom is direct relation with studying the Torah, the Scripture, the Tanakh, the New Testament. And why so many people are not doing it? Now, the divine has said, the parents should teach their children diligently. Now, parents these days, they are pagan as they can be, because they think some sort of a spirit's going to enter their children and it's going to lead them somewhere that they think by prayer and much time spent in prayer and more prayer. They don't teach the Scripture. In fact, the parents never learn themselves. So they give an absolutely scoundrel example as far as the Scripture, the walking with the Scripture. They don't do it themselves, but they expected their children to do what's in it. Now what the divine has said, teach your children diligently. That's precisely what Joseph and Miriam did. So not truly 100% sure where they get this portion of the New Testament that he was as very young person, and then because they were from a humble background, then the parents became outside of the whole focus. As Moshe, mostly he takes the credit for most of the Torah, when we don't have the details of what Yethro has taught him. Yethro, his father-in-law, had a great influence in his life. He was the preparer of what then the divine had set aside for Moshe. This very fast pace of life these days, we read the scripture, barely read it when reading it, and then we don't understand the importance of step-by-step formation. They think a spirit goes into the person. If it is, it is. If it isn't, it isn't. And there are more people that isn't with the spirit than people with the spirit. So why then the Hamashiach ben Yosef was very stern in what he was saying? Because Shavuot was coming. Now once again, people were searching for a spirit that doesn't have structuring. And then the divine said, teach your children diligently, because there are many aspects of the scripture, mostly related with the prophecies. We have to understand the scripture, so then the prophecies, we begin to read the instructions, we understand where the prophets are leading towards. So then, the Hamashiach ben Yosef was making a point of teaching this particular scripture in a very simple way. Either the parents were teaching or they were not teaching. And we're going to evaluate more of this particular section of the Hamashiach explaining the instructions and then the prophecies themselves. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.